So I wanted to be controversial at this conference, but I'm afraid that the two previous speakers, so there's a question here where Dan asks Rupert if they're talking about exactly the same thing, and the answer, I think, is yes, and I'm going to give another name for it too. I think we may be giving the impression that there's more homogeneity theoretically in the CSCL community than there might really be. Okay, so what I want to argue is that there's more to CSCL than just designing educational technologies and interventions. In particular, we have to invent an analytic methodology and theoretical frameworks in order to appropriate the unique character of collaborative learning in the sense that the two previous speakers have talked about it, as an interactional group or dialogical accomplishment. And to do this, I argue that in this paper that we need to focus on the small group as the unit of analysis. And the small group is where contributions come from individual interpretive perspectives, just like Rupert was talking about, and they're interwoven into what I call group cognition. So that the collaborative discourse itself is the agent of knowledge building, and that's what requires, what we have to provide computer support for and curriculum design for. So to put it as briefly as I can, my claim is that groups think. That is, that we can talk about groups being engaged in cognitive processes. Not just individuals think, but also groups can think. And the way I'd like to approach this in the first half of my talk is to make an analogy between the arguments in recent years in artificial intelligence, where the question was raised, can computers think? And I want to look at their arguments, their theoretical arguments, and apply them to the question, can groups think? And out of that, maybe get a sense of the relationship between collaborative knowledge building, as we talk about it, and thinking, as people use the term both in common sense and philosophically. So I'm going to, as I say in the first half of my talk, make a theoretical argument to support the fact that we can say that groups think, based on this analogy to the arguments in AI. And then in the second half, I'll look at empirical ways to investigate this question. And so I want to claim, to maybe be a little bit controversial at least, that the first half I prove on theoretical grounds that groups can think. Now, hopefully this is a claim that people will react against and say, how can that be? Only individuals can think, only individuals, have the apparatus to think, and so on. And I think the empirical argument is going to take the next 10 years to develop in a convincing way. And the theoretical argument probably does, if people are resistant to this notion, may take more than 20 minutes. And so, therefore, I've written a book on the topic, basically. But AI has made three main arguments about can computers think historically, beginning with Turing's original paper 50 years ago, and including Searle's famous Chinese room argument, which I thought was appropriate given the conferences in Taiwan. We can kind of visualize him sitting in a room here. And Dreyfus's argument that computers still cannot think. So let's take them one at a time. Back in 1950, in a very famous influential paper that really defined the field of AI since then, Turing posed the question, can machines think? And he defined what's since been known as the Turing test to measure if computers can indeed be said to think. And the Turing test says, can a computer answer questions the way a person can? So that if you're asking the same kind of questions to a computer and to a person, and you don't actually see them, but you just get the answers back, can you differentiate and figure out which one is the computer? And no computer has been able to fool people successfully. So as of now, which is more than 50 years, which is when Turing predicted that computers would be able to do this, computers have failed the test. So according to this criterion, computers cannot think. But if we ask the same thing about groups, suppose you pose questions to a small group and to an individual, say online, so you couldn't see who was answering, could the group fool you? Well, one simple strategy might be the group could just elect one of their members as a spokesperson, and then indeed that person would be answering as an individual, and so you couldn't differentiate that individual was speaking for the group. But in a deeper sense, and based largely on Rupert's dialogical way of thinking about things, a group discourse about a topic can in fact be identical, really, to an individual's narrative about the same topic, because in fact, individuals have internalized different perspectives, and so what they say is what they say when they're really debating a topic themselves is really a dialogical group process that's become internalized. So in that sense, a group could probably fool you into not being able to differentiate themselves, and thereby a group could pass the Turing test. Now, if we move on to John Searle, he did a thought experiment to see if computers think when they answer questions using AI techniques. So what his experiment was that he imagined himself doing the processing inside of a computer, and the computer was being given questions in Chinese and providing answers in Chinese, and Searle does not know Chinese at all, but as the person carrying out the computer's algorithms following a book of instructions that was written in English that he could use, he could answer the questions, assuming that this book of instructions was really effective AI algorithms. And he argued that even if he answered the questions such that a Chinese person giving the questions and receiving the answers would think that the computer understood Chinese and understood the topics that were being discussed in the questions, even if this were all true, Searle himself inside the computer or inside this room in China would not understand. He claims that he would not understand basically what was going on. He would not understand Chinese, he would not understand the meaning of the questions, and so on. And in this sense, he as the computer would not be thinking in the way that people think when they answer questions. So then let's apply this thought experiment to a group. So we put Searle into a group and have him participate in the answering, then I think he would say he did understand what was going on. He understood the questions, what the answers were all about, and so on. And so in this sense, I think groups can think in Searle's terms. Finally, Dreyfus argues that AI does not capture the way that people think and act and understand. So he draws on the analysis of philosophers like Heidegger and Merleau-Ponty, who talk about how people are situated in the world, and that's how they understand things. And he points out a number of problems that AI has run into. So for one problem was with retrieval. If you give a computer a bigger and bigger database of knowledge, it becomes harder and harder for the computer to retrieve relevant answers to questions that are posed to it. Whereas people, the more they learn, the better they are at answering questions and providing relevant answers. Eventually you become an expert on the topic by getting more and more data. That never happens to a computer. Also, AI has failed to be able to represent human skills and expertise more generally, and it has a real problem. Probably is theoretically impossible to have AI computers determining relevance of questions and answers and facts and so on the way that people do, which is one of a human's major skills. So in terms of Dreyfus's analysis, computers do not think. So let's apply his criteria to groups, and basically, according to along these dimensions, groups work just like people. If the group knows more, as a community say, taking CSCL as a large group, as we know more, we get better at answering questions. The questions we may realize that they're more complex as we know more and so on, but that's useful. Groups can act skillfully, it's relevant. And so in these senses, again, groups can think. So if we do a kind of geeky computer science comparison, we see that according to all three tests, computers and AI have failed to produce thinking computers. So on both the practical and theoretical grounds, we cannot say that computers think. But I think on all these grounds, by all these criteria, we can say that groups think. So what are the implications of this discovery of group cognition for our agenda here? So we're trying at this conference to reflect on our past and think about what we need to do in the future, who we are as a community and so on. Well, a community, any group, consists of, at some level, individuals and subgroups and a whole maybe hierarchy of different levels. But the personal agendas and the small group agendas are intertwined inseparably with the larger group. So if you think of the CSCL agenda for the whole community, it also involves what our research groups do intimately. And so what I want to talk about is my agenda in CSCL research and the agenda of my research group in Philadelphia. So if I look back over the last couple of CSCL conferences, in 2002, I argued for the need for more theory to clarify concepts of collaboration. And I'm very happy to say that I see a lot of that going on now at this conference, a lot more than before 2002 in this community. In 2003 in Bergen, I argued in my paper, which was the last plenary paper of the conference again, that meaning is a shared group phenomenon interpreted by individuals. So meaning, in the sense that Dan talks about meaning making, that's a group phenomenon. There is a role for individuals in interpreting and understanding what the groups that they're part of, understanding that meaning. But the meaning making itself is a group phenomenon, in general, in collaborative settings. That doesn't mean, I'm not claiming that individuals on their own in other settings don't make meaning, but in collaborative settings, it's useful to see it as a group phenomenon and to analyze it that way. And at the Kaleidoscope CSCL SIG in Lausanne last year, I argued for the need to focus on the small group unit of analysis. And now I'm presenting this concept as group cognition, both in my forthcoming book and in this paper. So what are we doing in my research group at Drexel University, which is represented by a number of people here in the audience? We're trying to conduct an inquiry into how to foster and support group cognition using computers. We want to identify, in particular, episodes of group cognition that's computer supported in our empirical data that we're collecting. We want to analyze the methods that online groups use to accomplish cognitive tasks collaboratively, and to document both the potential and the barriers to more effective group cognition. So we're putting small groups together online and studying this, realizing that group processes are often not very effective now, that we need to develop ways to support it and to teach people how to be collaborative more effectively. So we have a project called the Virtual Math Teams Project. We're in the second year of it. It's funded by the National Science Foundation, and it's in collaboration with a group called the Math Forum, which is also at Drexel, which is a digital library of resources for mathematics for middle school and high school predominantly. And we invite small groups of students who come to the Math Forum online. We invite them to join each other in small groups in chat rooms to collaboratively discuss challenging, interesting, creative mathematical issues and problems. And since it's a chat environment, we automatically collect almost basically all the aspects of interaction. So the chat log provides us with a record of pretty much everything that the participants saw of each other in the interaction. And we've taken three methodological approaches to starting to look at and investigate our data. One is conversation analysis, sort of an or very much an ethno-methodological approach like yesterday's keynote talked about, multidimensional coding, and ethnography. And in a sense, we do these sort of at separate times. Different people give reports about this, and we hold data sessions doing things, or we hold coding sessions, but it's the same people doing it and meeting together, and the results of these different analyses flow together and inform each other. And the project is to develop software, online digital library service, new curriculum about challenging math problems, and figuring out how to build a community of students who want to come back to this environment and repeatedly discuss mathematics with each other. So here's a typical chat log, and I've circled some proposals, some mathematical proposals. Like the first one is, okay, I think we should start with the formula for the area of a triangle. And if you read down just the proposals that I've circled, you get sort of a mathematical problem-solving strategy, and you can see that it's contributed to by the different individuals in the chat log. So here I've tried to outline the kind of thing that Dan and Rupert were talking about how the different people who are indicated by the three columns, the people are named PIN, AVR, and SUP. And so here's the proposal that I just read about what they should start with. And then there's uptake by other people. And you can sort of follow how the trend of responses of one person to another goes back and forth, and they're all sort of woven together into what I consider a group cognition problem solving. They're almost all, this one here you can see is an outlier somehow. But there's basically a sequentiality of the contributions to the chat log that I've tried to bring out in this representation here. A sequentiality which shows the uptake and the interanimation of the contributions from different people. And the unit of analysis, if we're trying to analyze problem solving, is the group. So in terms of analyzing this, I've come up with a concept called math proposal adjacency pairs. And you can see, if you look through it, that every time somebody makes a mathematical proposal, it's followed by an uptake by somebody else in the group. So there's always this dialogical aspect of adjacency pairs. There's one, wherever there's one proposal, there's somebody else saying, okay, or I agree, or I disagree. And this analysis, you can look in chapter 21 of my book, and I'll be presenting it in more detail at other conferences later this year. So we're interested in the sequential analysis of these chat logs. And I'd characterize in the next 4 slides, I'm going to characterize our research approach. So first of all, it's design-based research in the iterative style that Dan sort of outlined. We started with very simple technology. We did pilot studies. We analyzed them, trying different methodologies. We changed the technology and go through the cycle repeatedly. We focus on case studies, so I showed you a little case study there, basically, was that sequence from the chat log, the excerpt from the chat log. And we try to look at what's going on in these brief episodes. We're very interested in interaction analysis, understanding how individual utterances make sense of previous utterances and what's going on. We try to do very detailed microanalysis and determine what Graham Button called member methods, the methods that the students use to accomplish what they're trying to do, whether it's mathematics or socializing in the chats. And it's focused on this concept of group cognition. So the whole project is set up to try to provide an inquiry setting for looking at group cognition. So here's a little chart that looks at the 4 characteristics of what our project is trying to do in the next several years and contrasts it with kind of a stereotype of scientific investigation. And so if you want more information and details beyond what's in the paper itself, my book's going to be coming out in the spring, but it's available now for you free at the URL there. And I expect there'll be a lot of articles in the new journal that will be of interest to you as well. So open to questions.
Thank you very much. Questions, please. If there's no, is there? Okay, please.
Was there any chance that the group could fail the tests being consisting of individuals? The tests of whether a group can think? Because I understood that what you said about it, because a group is consisting of individuals and individuals can think, it's more or less impossible that some system consisting of 2, 3, or many individuals cannot be defined as thinking in this case. For example, the Turing test, if you do it in a way that you end up with one answer, okay. If you would end up with all the answers you get by a group, then it would be more difficult, of course. So how you defined it, I had the impression at least that it was quite difficult that the test would reject your hypotheses.
Well, how about Searle's test? So Searle is an individual, and he imagines himself inside running the innards of the computer. And yet that test fails to to show thought going on or intentionality, as he talks about it.
But you argued in a way that the individual in the groups understood what was going on, not that the group understood what was going on.
Well, what I said about putting Searle in a group is that I think he would say that the group did understand what was going on, and the group understood the questions and the answers, and that the group had the kind of intentionality that he was talking about. But I mean, you're certainly free to dispute that. The serious part of the talk is the second half of, and that can fail. It's an empirical thing. Can we find examples where the groups do mathematical problem solving as a group? It could be that we never find an example in the chat where the problem isn't solved by one individual who just says it and the others say, yeah, okay. So that's an empirical question. Can we find nice examples of where the problem is actually solved through this interanimation of perspectives, and that interanimation is what's really effective in solving the problem and building the shared meaning and so on.
I didn't question that, and I think your paper is really helping us to move forward. I was just questioning the tests.
Okay, there's one more question by Martin. And okay.
Yeah, again, coming to the first part of the talk, you said Searle's argument would be better, but Searle was just following an algorithm to answer the Chinese question. So if you could say he was following a script, answering the question, and he had no idea of what he was doing.
But so, a lot of AI people said following the script is knowing what you're doing.
Yeah, and now you put Searle into a group and they again follow a script, but that doesn't imply that they know what they are doing.
I think Searle's thought experiment appeals to his own intuitions about thinking. We don't have a definition of what thinking is.
Right.
We don't believe in that kind of definitions.
But it doesn't change the situation whether you have one person following the algorithm or a group of persons. That doesn't mean necessarily that they really think, that they know, that they understand what they are doing when they answer the question.
No, if you had a group inside the computer following the algorithms, that would not be thinking.
Yeah, right, exactly.
But I did a different experiment. I put Searle and took him out of the computer and put him in a regular group of people discussing some problem, and then saying that he would think if the group gave an answer that that the group understood what was going on in a way that the computer giving an answer does not understand.
Okay, I guess we have 4 more questions. We'll see. Ricky, please.
Yes. While groups obviously seem to cognate together, they're actively engaged in solving a problem, we still know very little about what they're actually, as individuals or as groups, learning. So it seems to me that cognition is the sort of active representation or active engagement. It's cognating. I'm sort of putting it into the active verb form. But I'm actually still concerned with, at the end, where we get to both individual and group learning in the process. And I also am questioning all the presenters for no one addressing the issue of what used to be called the tyranny of the group. Because obviously in group processes, there's all kinds of political agendas going on. And different theories and different groups and different individuals manage to have a way, and in different ways, to each one of us somehow or another, in different communities of practice, obviously have different levels of influence. So I'm just curious about why we don't talk about that political agenda as well, and how to make sure all the voices in terms of gender, ethnicity, global issues are being addressed in both the cognating, but also in terms of the end results of learning. So it's kind of a big question.
It's kind of at least three
parts.
questions.
Yeah, it's 3 questions, but you can
so
best
let me-
start with the cognate one, the
Let me
cognate
start
and
with
learning.
the cognate one. So that's a different chapter that I didn't get into, and I think
think
it's a
Dan
really
started with that
it's a really
answer.
interesting one, I think, which is that. So how do you see the learning going on in groups? And I was sort of sent down this whole path of looking at group cognition by realizing that you can see learning taking place, you can see thinking taking place in groups in a way that you can't see it generally in individuals. And that's because the group process requires the group to make visible to each other, to display to each other the learning, the knowledge, the meaning that's being built. That's what the whole discourse is in a group, is displaying the meaning making so that one person has to display to the other people in the group what they're contributing to the meaning making process.
So
So
what
if-
about the
if
role
you
of
have-
what about the role of reflection then? I mean, what about the fact
But
that
you can't, individual reflection you can't see. So you're sitting back there reflecting like crazy, but I don't know what you're reflecting about. But if you start asking me questions and I start answering them, and maybe we come to some kind of understanding about these things,
So if
then
I didn't-
everybody in this room,
Wait a minute. If I didn't respond to you, though, if I were
short
just sitting here, would I not be learning?
who knows what you're doing back there if you're not responding. But if you do respond, then, and so the chat room situation is, for me, a nice situation because all that's going on there is the explicit displays to each other. Whatever those students are doing at home, who knows? They're probably, SMSing and talking on the phone and going to the refrigerator and doing their homework, but that's irrelevant to it's irrelevant to the group cognition that's going on in the chat room.
Right, but it is not irrelevant to
Okay.
individual cognition.
No.
Let's try to have 2 more, if it's possible. Short
Sorry.
questions,
We'll continue.
short answers. Right, you could continue later. So one more, and probably Chris, and then probably I would propose having the coffee break, which doesn't mean you can't ask more questions individually, not in a group. To Gerry, probably. Please.
This is somewhat of a follow-up. Do you have evidence that it's real group cognition in that the students wouldn't be learning and doing that otherwise? So if they had that question and that problem, and there was 3 of them, could each of them have done it faster individually in their heads in 10 seconds rather than typing it in with a group in 10 minutes? So I'm wondering,
this
is
is
it
part-
individual cognition that's just coming out publicly? Is it actually adding an efficient value, I guess, to the process, and how would we know that?
This is an empirical question, and it's part of our research for the next 10 years. And when you ask me that at the 2015 CSCL conference, I'll be glad to give you a clear answer with lots of empirical evidence.
So you're invited for the next 10 years. So Chris, one more.
Okay, I'm going to ask a big question and not expect a big answer. So it seems like all 3 of these presentations have been trying to highlight the distinction between a very individualistic, cognitive, or even behavioral understanding of what CSCL is about and the kinds of technologies that we might build to support it and the type of research one would do in that paradigm, as compared to a more distributed sociocultural, dialogic view of what's going on and what learning is. And I guess one thing that I find very interesting is that all 3 presentations highlighted the similarity between CSCL and these other traditions of studying dialogue or studying practices. And there wasn't much discussion about the differences. And one of the differences that I keep bumping up against is the way in which those traditions don't necessarily have good models of design or agency or agendas or, as Ricky put it, politics. And so if there's a short response saying whether you think that's an easy or a hard marriage, then I'd be interested to hear about that.
So what's your short answer?
My short answer is that I'd rather answer Sharon's question to Dan, which I think is along similar lines about how we've all focused on the group as an alternative to the focus on the individual. And I think that taking that theoretical stance is a political act. I think that individualism is one of the real dangers of the last several hundred years, that it's a political ideology closely associated with capitalism and so on, and to critique individualism the way that we're trying to do within the context of CSCL is a political act.
I also want to reply by saying I think you've made a really good point, and I wanted to ask Gerry whether online communities can think.
Oh, sure. You just saw it.
So this was a perfect
But
short
you
answer.
advocate a small group and unit of analysis.
Oh, you mean large online communities? Well, my proposal would be that we try it out and we create an online community of CSCL that continues our knowledge building between conferences.
I guess.
And we'll discuss that at the workshop later this afternoon.
I guess all three speakers did a perfect job to really set us up in a way that we can really do have some discussions after the coffee break with the panel. So I just thank all three and thank you and just let you go to the coffee break and hope we can continue.